So being able to just simply move over to the object tree, hide everything else but their system, turn on their issues, and then follow their system as far as where all the clashes are on.
And don't mess with the actual overall BIM coordination. They're looking at their view just for their purpose of trying to solve that.
Exactly.
Welcome to the BIM Hero Podcast. In this episode, we will be joined by David Gomes from Revisto. We'll be discussing the state of BIM coordination and how Revisto is changing the industry when it comes to the areas of BIM coordination, collaboration, and constructibility. Welcome, David. I wanted to start off like I always do with any of the podcasts that we have here on the BIM Heroes Podcast. And would you introduce yourself and a little bit of history of how you came to Revisto?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Cody. It's really great to be here. My name is David Gomes. I'm with Revisto, but I am on the customer success side. Really, it's implementation, and each and every one of us on my team is of VDC in a previous life. I have VDC experience for the past 10 years. I have been in nothing else but virtual design and construction, coordinating many different project types, primarily here in the Southeast region of the US. I have started with GCs. I have touched into subcontractors as well along the way, civil design firms as well. And to be able to really just be the guy who's always touched the new and shiny object with a tool that, we want to go do some R&D, the company at the time. We find this to be the cutting edge. I was always the first person there. And through that, I've developed habits of always doing that. It's developed myself as a way to lead and to figure out solutions on the projects that I was on, and really then brought me to with what ended up being my me joining Revisto. So since then, I think it was after 10 years being applied on many different project types, data centers, government jobs, commercial work, healthcare, taking that, bringing that into Revisto, implementing on project types with others, other users, other customers, and being able to make sure that I take my experience with Revisto and make sure that the application works in the way that it's supposed to with those teams. So that's where we're at today.
And one of the things that I kind of wanted to dive into is, BIM coordination has been around for quite some time now. What do you see BIM coordination today versus what it was? And what is still some of the challenges that you see with BIM coordination?
I think looking at really BIM coordination today feels like it's finally beginning to evolve and move in a more, I guess you could say it's in a more perfected direction. And I say perfected because there are a lot of efficiencies that are coming in from standards of years that I've seen other VDC managers taking coordination and understanding how we're coordinating based on their project type. They're developing strategy books based on their type of work that they service. And it's really beginning to see we're moving out of that generic type of approach for coordination. And then, of course, the software is moving along with that. There's plenty of softwares that have come along since Navisworks was originally used. And through that, it's just the perfection of how we're approaching coordination items, clash items, and being able to be how to communicate that across the MEP trades, project teams, and everyone is beginning to engage in a more collaborative way. So same thing with Revisto. It's everyone's in the same spot. We're all talking about the same things, and we're logging them in that same space as well. So we're just simply enough just providing a support for those conversations to happen in an efficient way.
Do you see with that the design, construction, and sub world starting to really engage as one? Because that has always been one of the biggest challenges. Design teams giving the information over to a contractor to then give over to a subcontractor, then as a team build that facility.
Sure, absolutely. Um, it's beginning to take hold and change from the exposure that I've been in, many involved in just different project types, users using Revisto. But even before bringing Revisto into the conversation, the coordination practices, even the construction practices, I would find progressive by region of the US right now. Primarily Southeast, I'm still seeing some traditional coordination practices. We do have our evangelists out there that are trying to engage MEP teams, design teams in a different way. And it's all based on relationships and coordination. Project teams that I come in, I find all project stakeholders are friends. Everything is moving perfectly. West Coast, it seems it's more of a standard. It's as far as, hey, the project type is pretty traditional, but everyone acts like if it's an IPD project and everyone's a part of the same, we're all have the same responsibility here. And so let's engage that way. So hopefully that begins to change as we move through and with what we see across the US. But I would say right now we're getting there.
Do you think that one of the biggest setbacks to the process here in the US versus, let's say, overseas, with discussions I've had with people overseas, which they're further ahead than we are in this process, when and if the US will get to the point where the design model becomes the contract document? Do you think that's in the near future, or do you still think that's a good ways out?
I think that would be the near future. From my perspective, I have not met nor have found an organization trying to really begin pushing with what model contracts would be. There has been some activity that I saw originally when NFTs were originally coming out. That has since, I think, died down a bit. I would say from a practical approach, as far as us evolving into that, would be more of how project documentation and the digital version of that live side by side and are accessible side by side with each other until the conversation begins to make almost a common sense approaches. This information is the same. It's in the same spot. We need to understand that the model itself is exactly with what we're receiving from project documentation, and the references of it is coming from the same source.
And most of it is made from the model to begin with. Yes, there is supplements, there's notes, there's things that the design team will put in onto the drawings, but the most challenging thing and most frustrating thing for the construction and the subs is that we're trying to understand your intent. And yes, the drawings are that contract, and that is what we need to be able to review at this time and progress forward. But the model brings it into a 3D environment that you can even understand it even more. But if it's not complete, or it's not where it needs to be for coordination, you just have a lot of frustrated people that you then have to either build it on your end to get to those different conditions to make sure it's correct, or you're taking a lot of risk. And I get a lot of conversations is, that push, as other countries have done, has worked well. And I think that it's just something to look for in the future of this industry.
I would agree. It's definitely, I would say, while we continue to evolve, my belief is what we see abroad as far as a BIM process, I believe that we'll see an evolution of continuing to GCs in the US would still continue to establish BIM standards as they receive the design models, the design drawings on their projects. I would see more of a cooperation from design teams still becoming more involved over time. But I don't think that we'll see design leading BIM standards here in North America too soon. I would say the culture for BIM standards and design teams, there are exceptions out there. I will admit that, but in the general project coordination standard project, mid-size, smaller project that may have a version of what BIM should be as a standard, I would say it's going to take longer for project types for that to fully change. So good point here is, while right now, my belief is BIM is being standardized in the field and we're seeing a bunch of activity there, that is the work in progress of with what we've been seeing as far as BIM and VDC work with in our region. I would say that amount of time that we have taken, 10 plus, 15 plus years of really engaging the field teams, maybe is just as long, if not maybe a little bit shorter, depending on just the natural curve of technology and engaging users through that, would see design teams to probably match that same timeline of them finally beginning to engage as well.
Yeah, I think that you're definitely seeing a lot of sub participation because they do see the benefit. One of the biggest, roadblocks was always getting that information out to the field once it was complete. We were still going from a 3D to a 2D drawing to communicate that back out to the field. But with the new technologies that you're seeing, I do agree that that has taken a lot of steps forward versus, trying to get a design group to engage in that and think that that is part of the overall contract documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing, though, that you're also seeing is design teams, although they might not think that the model is per se a contract document, they are engaging in the meetings a lot. I know that was one of the biggest challenges too back was, okay, here's our intent. Please submit RFIs, please submit, documentation on the coordination aspect. But Mr. Contractor, you're responsible with the help from the subs and their skill level, their specialties, to figure out how all this works. And I think that now, with all the ways that you see the different deliveries and design, build, and STEM at risk, IPD, you're starting to see them get more and more involved in that process. And I think that is becoming a lot better, more successful.
I agree. Typically, it's always that first engagement with design teams that will really set off a good understanding of how the project will perform. And our communication back to design teams as well. If we're very much acting along project process, which is perfectly fine, I'm okay with that. But if the questions continue to come as far as, what are things that pique my interest, generally, as far as if we're interacting with a new application like Revisto, and we begin to do follow-up meetings based on what else can Revisto do, then that allows us to still perform along project process within the Revisto project, but at the same time we are slowly evolving those processes with those teams, and it's just pushing the needle into the right direction as far as where design teams are releasing the appropriate information that they're comfortable doing so, because that is I think even across all applications that designs and GCs use to manage their information between each other, there's always a misconception as far as how much information you're also releasing. And to be able to show that amount of control that the design teams have, that they could still perform within protocol, that they are they are precisely releasing the data that they would need to, based on bulletins, based on the releases, based on the project schedule, and they would very much just have a better understanding, just to say, the collaboration we can provide is not a all or nothing type of approach. It's very much, if they're in tune with the information they have on their Revit model, their drawings that they're releasing, you can very much just have that same level of control inside Revisto.
Yeah, and I think that's a great conversation as well. As we have LOD, level of development, and we try to associate that with the different levels of design, SD, DD, CD, and so forth, and then the level of detail that then follows as part of those different aspects. I think one of the things that you're starting to see is now with the introduction of the cloud and them being able to collaborate in design, let's say in Revit, in a different way than they ever have. That's giving the ability, if they give the ability, to grab those different things from the cloud and bring those down. But one of the challenges that I also see, though, is they have, as a design group, they have a hard time sometimes saying, okay, yes, this is constantly updating. Our consultants are constantly giving advice on how to do that while we go through the process of putting this together. And one of our biggest challenges is if you are a part of that and you download that at a certain point, where is that versus where we are contractually held to? And I'll rephrase that in just a little in a different way. When they give us a set of drawings, they say, stop the print. Here it is. This is the SD. Here is the DD. And here is the CD. And then here is your bid drawings. When you have a model that's constantly collaborative and constantly updating, it's great for them because they're making the changes as they go. But then there's a hard line stop. So their biggest argument is if you pull that down between those different stages at the front end, then we might be further or behind where it needs to be. And I kind of want to go through that process of where you think that that's heading.
I think that's a really great point, and it's such a coincidence because this past week has been a lot of conversations around that as well, with specifically design teams. And I think the statement you just made, as far as even using programs like Revit that we've had for a while now, the design gets ahead of where our hardline stops are at for those projects. And I think it's around standardization. As we receive tools, where are the conversations with new tools, with existing tools, to standardize a lot of these processes and to really bring Revisto into the conversation is a whole other slew of, releasing information to everyone in this application. That's all project stakeholders, that there are some in the project that we may not even want to have that reach. It's seen as a level of risk that that is not a point to say it's a bad thing. It's a more of a point to say we need to have conversations around our processes that could have been standardized and maybe should have been standardized many years ago. But now that we see cloud-based applications releasing information to others, it's simple as just taking that human input, being able to say, is this something as simple as, is that hardline stop a copy of information? I would think so, as far as where that hardline stop is at, where our modelers are at based on that hardline stop, and releasing that information as such. I don't think we need a feature or application or a solution that does that, or plugin in Revit. I think it's very much, as long as we are all engaging as individual teams to an entire project, as long as we do that correctly, we should not be worried about the data that we release.
Because a lot of that comes down to like the cost of a project.
Exactly.
Those hard deadlines are not the design team really wanting to stop designing, right? Their time frame is very short compared to ours to build it, but even ours is short to build it. And it really, when it comes down to it, it's if we don't come to a stop where we put the pen down, or the terminology would be putting your pens down, we can't effectively give a good cost to the owner, because if something's always changing, it's always adapting, and then that cost is always changing and it's moving, and the schedule could be moving, and so you've got this back and forth that occurs. And I think with the advent of different technologies, whether it be around 5D or 4D or any of these different things, I think it's going to help in that aspect. But I think it's a really big challenge, and I think if you could somehow set permissions at this point that this is what you're able to get from us, because the other aspect of it is, as the information managers of these design firms, have come about. They have different titles, different names. They develop out all these different families within Revit and everything that brings the model together as a whole that we end up using. They don't want their data to be stolen, nor do they want it to be seen before they want us to see it. Then there's a point in which that's required, because they could be looking at 25 different options on how to solve a problem, and they really don't want us to know exact the one that they want to go to until they figure it out. Like they figure out which one, and that's just the simple design process that they're going through. Do you think that that's the step forward, is maybe permission based and like stopping that, or do you feel like it's more collaborative and get rid of the boundaries of SD, DD, CD, and just go to a more fluid dynamic all the way until we get to construction?
I would say your second comment is the solution in the long run. And I would say you and I may have a few decades on us at that point, but that would be the goal. I in the perspective of myself, being in a GC role as well, but also in VDC, understanding that the process also entails more information that we would have to understand, as far as the information that's released to us, what is official, what is ahead, and to be able to have that transparent conversation. And I think that's a lot of what it is transparency. Transparency, allowing a project type that eventually will be standard, as far as everyone's a part of the same project. We're moving in more of an integrated project delivery, or an approach that is similar, because I think that's just as far as what the natural culture of technology and construction is going to go in that direction. But for now, I would say that right now it's about our information that's being released. We're not trying to point fingers. We don't want it to get to that point. And so
because it's already confrontational already.
Exactly.
Don't want to make it more confrontation.
Exactly. And I think that's also a best held point, because we want to make sure that the software gets us to that point. We can still have all the conversations, the local roundtable groups, as far as establishing those relationships, establishing that trust. I think that is necessary. But in order for anything to slip, that access right approach, being able to release information appropriately and what you're viewing at the same time, is with what will get us there in the long run. Because then we'll be able to have a better understanding of that release of information up front. But you also bring up a good point, because that's not you and I talking and establishing that. That's very much of an application that we would see as some design teams that use Revisto to be able to establish those standards. They have control of that process. They release that information appropriately. They trust the information. And then there's an application handoff. Typically, what's beautiful about this is, as far as if we have design teams using Revisto, GCs using Revisto, it's all of the same environment. It's a simple handoff of information. Design teams know with what they're releasing. GCs know with what they're receiving. It could be a part of the same project. It can be a different version of the same, a different version of a Revisto project, but it's all the same infrastructure. Everyone is entering those projects at a collaborative level. It just becomes more fluid as far as understanding the information that's there, knowing that it's released, who's accessing that at what right. It's what I think what needs to happen, the application controlling that for now, but it's also getting people talking.
Yeah, I think one of the other aspects, kind of switching off of the design, but going to, let's say, the subcontractors. I think one of the things you're also starting to see in that regard is some of the vendors are starting to get involved. So the manufacturers and the vendors of different products, especially if they're really specialties, the third party, opera partitions or fireproofing or all different types of things you're starting to see now. I hope that part of the industry starts to develop out, different, families, whether it's steel mills or different things like that. and they get engaged, because I think that's a whole nother aspect of the industry that kind of gets missed. That's a huge aspect of how procurement occurs, or where the subs get that information and then their products, and then bring that to the field to actually construct. And I know you've had these situations, but it's nothing more frustrating when a manufacturer, let's say, of a mechanical equipment provides, submittals of product data, and we model it. We, with the subs, we put it in the model. It fits and everything works well. You've got line lengths that go to it, and then all of a sudden the line lengths are longer than they can be. And I hope the next phase of BIM coordination has some of that automation of, let's say, code versus different manufacturers say that, okay, if this occurs in the model and you get to this length, set up an alert that it has gone that long and it's now violated our warranty or something. I think that is a huge step in the future to help make better decisions, because in the world that we've both grew up in the last 10 years, it's always been about spatial, right? That's what coordination was always about, is how this and this interacted, and if this hit this. But now it's if you look at it in through that lens today, it doesn't always make a lot of sense, because some things can actually hit each other, like a clearance on a VAV, for instance. But you have to have the knowledge base to be able to understand that, yes, that might be a clash, but in the field, that might be enough space for them to be able to service that unit. And I want to question that I have with this comment is, do you see that being another direction in the future from the sub and the vendor side of things taking off?
Yes, I do. I mean, these are really great questions. These are, I'd say that would be a natural progression. And when you're mentioning this to me, it brought me back as sort of a flashback as on specific projects that I've coordinated and have prepared a handover model that was at the highest level of detail that the owner required. We're talking, premier owners that are out there that understand the value of their data. What is their model that they're receiving, and the information that's entailed. And right now it's at a very, very basic form, model selection, type properties. I get a little bit more custom properties on top of that based on my equipment. But it's all text-based. It's all just general fields. And we could say that's probably just the standard. There are some outliers out there using applications, FM softwares that are more engaging, have a little bit more intelligence to it, but we're still scratching the surface. But to my point is, when you have a GC who is ensuring the level of detail that their models that they're receiving, and more than enough, the procurement process, if I always see, and is still in general, is the VDC teams are not involved in the procurement process. And, as subs are bidding for the project, we're of course going to go for either one, the best case scenario, the sub who we have the best relationship with. And what gets me scared is as far as, who gives the lowest bid.
Yeah.
And understanding, what are the risks that come with that.
Yeah, the lowest qualified bidder.
Exactly.
Well, what is qualified is what it comes down to.
Exactly. Like, okay, it's qualified and I like your number, but what does that mean for VDC? What does that mean for the owner? And I think it's just more of making sure having a better understanding of all those project stakeholders as far as like, what are those risks involved and what exactly is the owner looking for? Because that is typically not top of mind in the procurement process. And so when you have situations where right now you don't get enough level of detail from subs on what we're spatially coordinating, but is also what is very much part of their model, it falls on the GCs to ensure that information is there. And that is a laborious process. If you're required to go up to beyond a level of 500 level of detail, everything needs to have a description. That handover is not prepared for at least, 5-6 months to a half a year before that's prepared, because there is so much information, especially on the project type that the owner is requiring, that that should have been included in those MEP systems as those detailers, as those modelers were
together.
coordinating their information to us.
Do you think that the procurement aspect could be added to the BIM coordination process as a whole? And what I mean by that is use the model to actually see what's on site, and then what is being installed, and back checking to make sure that it's
exactly. And it's too, with what we mentioned earlier in the beginning of the show, it's the progress that we're making with the field teams, our operation teams, understanding and ensuring that the technology, as far as making BIM more aware to other stakeholders on those teams, and what does that mean for them? They can't get a general sense of what am I doing every day. It's what is BIM doing for them, and where do their ears need to perk up as far as their daily operations go, whether if it's project ramp up, whether if it's understanding what these subs are providing. It's more than just a spatial coordination. It's more than just a pretty model. It's the information that's embedded within it, and what exactly is it, to then be able to understand with what they're going to expect to the field, and what they plan to receive over to the owners as well, or send over to the owners.
Yeah, because for all the way from beginning to end, if you're going to give a owner that is really in the need of a FM facility management model, that starts from the top, all the way from the time that it goes on a napkin, all the way until it gets to completion, and you hand that over to them. And we've dealt with a couple of different owners that have had that capability, and then they've taken it to a different level, and they run their facility using it. And I think it's really fascinating, that aspect of it, because you have to keep developing that model, like you said, as you go. Or if you get to the end and you try to put all this data in there at the end, stuff's going to be missed, and you're not going to have a complete set that you really need from all the different parties that were involved.
Exactly. And it's also that push as far as, as a standard service from a general contractor, and a general contractor that is very advanced in their construction technology and BIM processes. It's also about beating on the drum with your owners. What are you handing over to them? It can be the highest quality level handover that they could receive. And they may not do anything with it, which is fine. But I think at the same time, it's a matter of understanding that, letting that repeat itself, and eventually allowing that light bulb to turn on within the owner's heads, as far as the information that they receive could potentially be used as a way to operate their facility. Because the trend is that, it's not going to be one person managing that facility anymore. That process is going to eventually be automated. But what does automation need as far as being able to digest with what's coming, information, data? And so as that begins to move forward, we're going to begin to see that owners need a way to address, as far as, I don't have the people I need anymore to help. I think there was a few cases where I would find owners with their facility managers being an old retired superintendent on that specific job to maintain their facility. And
which leads to the question about bringing the different types of personnel into coordination. And I think this is an aspect that the world has done well in the past, but I think it could get better into the future, especially here in the United States. We're constantly, as we're working through these projects on the front end or in pre-con, that aspect of constructibility versus coordination. So from the time that the project is won by both sides, the design team and by the contractor, one of the biggest challenges that you see is Mr. Contractor, please keep the design team, let's say, in line with what our expectations are for what we want, but this is the budget that we have. And I think one of the things that I talk to a lot of people about is a design team owning the intent and the contractors owning the actual process of building. That's never changed. That has always stayed the same. I think that it's the change is more of a master builder now, being able to understand all the different aspects at a very high level as a GC and really depend upon the subs to give that specialty trade experience to do so. But I think constructibility is changing. When it changes, coordination is going to change on the back end because they're related in general. One of the things that you've seen a lot, and I know that you have, is can the contractor get more involved even before the design team gets involved? And this is my question is, I think because now a lot of owners are really worried about a pretty picture. They want to see that beautiful rendering of what their building could look like from what they gave the design team that they wanted. You take that, what we wanted, that program that we're asking, and now develop that. But when they really get down to it, it's looking at what just looks really, really good in a picture. But it's kind of like buying a house that you can't afford. You know, you see these shows where, you know, I want this, and this, and I want it for, you know, $60,000 or something.
And you're a florist.
Yeah. And right, that and then they said, okay, and they take you to another house and they show you everything that you wanted, and they said, oh, this is amazing, this is exactly what I wanted. And then they tell you how much it costs and you can't afford it. And that's just that's on a different level in the commercial world, because we're not talking about, you know, let's say less than $1 million or so for homes. We're talking about multi-million-dollar projects. And I think the industry is getting to a point where a lot of owners are like, you know, I have $50 million, but I can't build a school. Like, what happened? Like, why can't, what are you providing me that I've asked for, but what do I actually get? And the question is, constructibility and coordination go hand in hand, because it's a pass off from pre-construction and the constructibility aspects of the GC giving back to the design team and the owner their thoughts and process of how they go from point A to point B on a cost and schedule point. And can it actually be built? That's the one aspect of constructibility that a lot of people miss. It's not just if it can cost something or we can get it done in time. Is it actually constructible? Because in a picture, anything can happen. You know, you don't have to follow physics. So my question is, with where coordination is, do you think that bringing the model and programs like Revisto into the constructibility aspect at the very beginning of projects as the design is being developed would help us better understand to the client that they can actually afford it?
Yes. And it's more of, it's while Revisto is releasing that information and allowing every stakeholder early on to be a part of the same process, Revisto very much in that sense, we would be talking way before models are even generated. We're looking specifically at, you know, 2D schematics. The general contractor, you know, should understand where that process is at. And I think as far as being able to have conversations that early on, they're sensitive conversations. They completely are. And I think as far as it's going to take the approach of the person to understand where they're at, how early on. The fact that this is something that's new should also be cared for, as far as let's you know, we're getting this type of exposure, we're getting our say in this, but at the same time we're bringing some reality to the conversation early on that eventually aids us as we move through coordination and construction. So Revisto very much would then have that place as far as that true evolution of where a project should begin, and allowing us to begin seeing what those early on designs would be, even if we're just comparing and overlaying PDFs inside the application, to then allowing those designs to then mature enough to the point where we begin receiving those models to begin with. Then we have more of a guidance as far as being able to generate and output information outside of what's being designed, and being able to have an aid process to say with what that information from the design teams they're releasing to Revisto, and all team members, whether it can be very creative. Before I continue to conclude that comment, but you're getting my mind thinking as well as far as like what could be done in Revisto. It can be very much of Revisto can release, folders of those 2D documents within the 2D environment, but they don't have to be drawings. They don't have to be early on design schematics from the design teams. They can very much just be, here's our set list of rules early on, making sure that the GCs apply like a stamp to acknowledge that they agree early on with what could be, digital documents, digital models with.
And that information could regarding, scope of work, costs, scheduling of how long that takes. I think that's all going to be a part of that.
Exactly.
There's nothing worse than sitting down with the design team beforehand and going and saying, I don't think the owner can afford this. And we're going to go into this room and we're going to have this hard conversation with them. And the nasty word that's going to come out is value engineering. And at that point, when we get to the final product of it, we really start to strip away what they really wanted as part of the building to make it unique. And I just feel like that confrontation just continues to this day, where we're at odds with the design team because they think we're the bad guy. The big bad contractor says, well, you can't afford that, Mr. Owner, because everything in the world is so much more expensive today. And our response is we will build you the pyramid, but at the end of the day, it has to work for the time that you're building it. And I think that limiting, the design team's ability to give us a product that different ideas of it, we shouldn't be limiting because we should price that. I just think that as a GC, we need to get more and more involved at the front end using, constructibility to not just look at 2D drawings, but look at it in a 3D environment and actually start to break down those different things. And on the other aspect, I think that what would be really nice to see within a coordination tool like Revisto is design teams taking their knowledge of code and being able to back check the code of what they are building. I think that's a huge aspect. I mean, every year codes changes, whether it's at a local level or at a state level, at a national level, or international level. And being able to use it not only for like basic coordination like we do in a lot of stance, but actually back checking, code requirements. Where do you think that is going on that front?
That is a good point as well. If that is something that Revisto can do as far as with what's connected to a database, those are conversations as far as development goes for our end that, is that possible as far as Revisto connected to databases, vetting the model, being able to ensure that, is the model also reflected in the same way. Very practical conversations that we're having a version of that talked about right now as far as opening up a model API, what are those connections can provide, and what are those connections externally that we can use as a way to talk back to Revisto or bilaterally talk between Revisto and another application. For the one thing there is that we're talking of a progressive advancement in understanding how you model versus code, or how you provide information that is code compliant. This is a shift as far as is that could be a Revisto conversation. I do completely agree with you. But at the same time, can we have that at a time where the authoring software has that information already built into it?
And you're seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
You are definitely starting to see that. But exactly. I also think that it could also be on the contractor side for specifications too. It could back check the specifications just as much as it does code.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. But it's very much of where do you want it, it's the ball in court conversation. Mm-hmm. That this is 100% with what it is, because I'm going back and forth. Who do you want that information to have to as far as those specifications? Because if it's the contractor that is starting those conversations, it's going to come off horrible. Mm-hmm. Even if
because you're attacking the design as a whole.
Exactly. Even if we're using a database that we can ensure that this is real world information, and we're applying that on top of your model, that is going to be a longer fought battle, even with the help of software, to be able to have conversations, because the GC is bringing this in. If we have it from the front end, as far as how that information is being received from the authoring side of things, then a conversation of practicality comes into play.
I think on the backside of it with the contractor, they are obviously worried about the code, but they're also worried about the specifications. And that's why I think earlier in the conversation I was having, if there's something that could be built into collaboratively between the subs, their manufacturers of the equipment that they're getting, and the GC, that back check of just standard things like line lengths to condensing units and clearances and stuff like that just sends up an alert saying, check this. We think that this manufacturer has these requirements for this type of unit, and it appears that it's past the amount of length that's actually allowed.
Exactly.
So whether it's on the front end with the design team and like an authoring tool, where it's giving them code issues where they got to fix, I think on the back end, stuff like Revisto could actually allow you to do like specifications checks and basic length checks, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think as far as with what we're seeing, even Revisto is very much going into allowing. We're talking about automation here. We're talking about trusting the data. You still make
the decision, the final decision, right? But it's just alerting you to something that might be a violation.
Exactly. But at the same time, to play devil's advocate here, is when we receive a solution, or we're just talking about the model just being connected to an external database. That's all we're talking about here. And allowing that the data to be validated, that is outside of that is in your face. It is not a conversation that's being picked up out of thin air. It is hard facts. But then we have to come into what we see as far as how construction is done in the US. It's now getting all project stakeholders to trust that data. Similarly to when we're out in the field, and what GIS coordinate system surveyors are using, and do we trust that data? It's the same thing as far as the data that we're receiving on what we're going to connect to the model. And do all project stakeholders is it data set A? Is it data set B? What is the project being established on? And that is type of documentation that doesn't even exist right now.
Of course. And then I think that's a good lead into our next conversation, which is, what is Revisto, and what is like where you were versus where you are today?
So Revisto, my elevator pitch over the years has gotten a lot better. And really, we are just a central application of information that all is being consumed by all project stakeholders. That consumption of data is model data, it is project documentation, it is something as simple to the drawings and could be integrated with the project management platform. Simple enough as just a file map to where the drawings are at and have them connected to Revisto. One thing that Revisto does and it excels as far as referencing a model, we reference models, but also log information to the models, to the 2D documentation. And if those are markups, it's a quick text, it's a quick chat within the application on how problems are arising and how we're solving them. And that's all held by record. So regardless if you're using Revisto as a way to coordinate during MEP coordination, early on design, it's all collaboration with all project stakeholders from the beginning to end. And once you're done, you have a project with all conversations organized in a way that is appropriate. If you want to hand it over to the owner as a way of saying, you required just a standard handover, here it is, but think of these issues that we're handing over to you as your receipt. This is all your issues that we found, and this is how we came to that resolution as well.
Which I think is something that has always been missed in coordination.
Mm-hmm.
It was always you throw up a viewpoint, you write a couple words on the screen, and that's pretty much it. Most of the viewpoints were never labeled, and having that ability to have a full dialogue about each issue, controlled by stamps, controlled by the person that you're assigning to, controlled by all the different levels, all the filters that you can do within it, and then being able to actually talk between each other and have a full dialogue, whether it's just you and the sub that's trying to fix the issue or bringing in people from your teams and adding them into the issue as watchers. I think that has always been a major flaw in coordination, is the collaboration of talking about the issue you're trying.
Exactly. And I think as far as what is that eye-opening moment for Revisto is conversations that make me very excited, because if I'm going on with a new user with Revisto and we're just using it for general coordination, but we stay there for each project, we're missing the point. Because Revisto, while we have features that have been similar to Navisworks, that have been similar to other coordination platforms, I just say Navisworks because that was my bread and butter.
That was the standard for years.
Exactly. And so it's if it's still seen as a siloed application that's to VDC, I just want to throw my hands up and just walk away.
Yeah.
Because it's simple as enough as just saying, having conversations to even say like search sets that we've been typically using, as a way to organize our information can now provide a better benefit. Something as simple as search sets to your PMs, to your superintendents, to your MEP engineers on a project, and to be able to find that information better and more accurate as far as what that means to them and how can they track that information. They don't want to see it as an issue when it's a problem. Yes. There are some that are proactive and want to go find it. So then we could set up that environment for them as a way to navigate and to be able to track and understand how is that evolving as we receive model updates. And so it's taking that approach as far as, let me put myself in others' shoes on my project and to see how is that valuable to them. And you take that approach and you bring everyone in on their project and you say, this is what they would want to see out of the model. This is something that should have happened way down, early on. But it's because as far as, do I have the machine to support and to support a Navisworks spec or a BIM spec machine? Do I have Do I have access to that information? Do I understand it? It's been very much of a process that we've always taken on and have learned ourselves. And now we have the ability to say, this is something that you can have on your PC, your iPad, your cell phone, and still access that information at that same recurrence of updates as I would have here on, my VDC machine.
It makes it much more interactive. Clash detection has always been, you hit the button and here comes all the clashes. And then you got to go through all the different pieces of that. And I just think with the issue tracker that Revisto has developed, like we talked about it's made it so much more collaborative and interactive, not just for the coordinator or manager from the GC, but behind the scenes with the actual coordinator from the subs, because now they're able to have a full dialogue. They can interact with it being solved. I need to submit an RFI on this. Let's elevate it to an RFI. Let's and I think that has always been missing as well. That has been really well developed in this.
I would agree. And to your original comment of where we're going, as you know, we just released a recent update this past week called Revisto version 5.13, and it contains many different added features, and know that they're all quality of life features, because where we deem quality of life is being able to hear our users and with what they need to achieve coordination in a way that works for them. And so that process is on the back end with our developers is a very exciting and engaging process, because it's also teaching our teams as far as with what the industry is asking for. And the fulfillment that our developers get out of that is being able to develop a small added feature and know that at each feature is a single developer working on those. So as you're ever move back to the change log and being able to see as far as with what's added, that's a single person that's working on that for that update for users. And those are things that we understand as far as in order to achieve coordination at a better rate, or to still use added features that we may not have, like that Navisworks had, but we needed to get in there. Those are things that we understand is we're not trying to recreate the wheel here right off. We're making sure that the base of our users have a way to adapt and then build off of that.
Which I think is really great when you look at the issue tracker as a whole, that automation where it allows the sub to create their own clashes. It also allows us to send our clashes to them and then have a back and forth conversation, but then also tying it back to the old school way of doing it with 2D overlays. And I think that's another big part of what Revisto does really well and has done a lot better than any of the coordination softwares I've ever seen, is taking that ability of the old school way of doing it, looking at the plans, but bringing that into the 3D environment to do BIM coordination and issue tracking. And whether it's a floor plan, whether it's a detail, whether it's a shop drawing, whether it's elevations, it has the ability to have all that overlaid with a simple click of that little green home button that you have tied to. And then on top of all that, the issues and the stamps are on it. So then you have a full dialogue from the beginning of, us that are really engaged in the issue tracking and then all the way to the field where they're looking at something that they always have known. And they're like, oh yeah, here's the RFI on this. And that's tied to the project management solution that has the information about that. So talk a little bit about that and where that's.
It's the process. It's like, just as what you explained, we're allowing the connection of all those data points that come together. I refer to them as data points, but with where each point is connected is a conversation. Whether what we originally held in 2D and was not associated to 3D model whatsoever and created as an issue, what is that issue traditionally? An email with some snapshots or maybe a PDF that was packaged well and sent off to the design teams. It's now about that connection of information. And the way that I'll always bring that engagement to inside Revisto is if we're looking at it from a general conversation, Revisto is a sandbox of information.
It absolutely is.
And so we're not disconnected in any way through different modules, through different windows, through different spaces that I may not be living in. We're all there. And the best way to do it is take the human approach, take those creative juices that everyone has, and to be able to say, where do you want to start? Preferably the way that I've always done it, David. Perfect. That's perfectly fine. You want to stay in 2D or you want to stay in the 3D model, place your stamp issues. And, as the issue goes and you want to assign it to your PE who's out in the field and they're referencing the drawings, guess what? They also have a view of where they're viewing things at in the model as well.
I feel like I get that comment from all the new PEs of the industry. They're like, how did these guys do it all the way back in the day? I take this model and I'm going through the generic ways and means of my job as a PE to go through submittals and RFIs and like that. And I understand the submittal before it even gets to the job. I understand the RFI and what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And I think that's a huge thing for me. When somebody says that at that level, and when then a superintendent out in the field can look at that with those different overlays and what they know and true, and overlay that on a 3D aspect of it, it's just absolutely powerful and in every which way. And now taking it to the foreman level and showing that down to, let's say, a PT slab, and showing exactly where the plumber or the mechanical sub has got to put their penetrations in the slab, and having that dialogue right there in the field saying, yes, we can do that, but you're going to have to go with a different schedule 40 or something a sleeve that's going to occur in that slab. And it's happening right then and there versus 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, well, we need a different type of sleeve now. We knew that. We have it right here. I just think that is a huge, powerful nature for this to do.
And to that, we've taken those core conversations, we've put them to button clicks. And now our goal is to then reduce those button clicks, providing a level of added features that we have now taken, like with the update that we have. Those are all added button click features that most of our users have wanted. But now we're then going to take our logic of automation and to be able to then provide Revisto a system of how those issues would then be resolved. That system can be a rule-based system. As tasks are completing, those tasks would have an automatic assignee to the next person to approve it. So when you have for your engagements with your foreman, they can use that issue as a way to validate their checklists. Think of it as like a checklist process as they're moving through and validating a change has been made and wanting to solve that issue. You can still give them the ability to close the issue as a way to confirm, provide a quick text entry as far as, as a way to input. But you'll be able to provide a level of sequence as far as handing that back to the BIM teams, having that finalized over to your superintendent if it needs to go that far, and then the issue would then close itself. So,
and that's what I love about that, and I also like the fact that you have that visibility of issues, but you can turn them off if you just want to look at the model. Let's just look at the model. If I want to know if there's an issue there, turn the issue of visibility back on. There's the tags that show that there's an issue. But you also can filter all that. So each of the subs has the ability to filter all those different aspects down to what they're needing to, or they can see the full gambit of what's going on in each of those different aspects.
Exactly.
And then report that out to them.
Yep. 100%. And you're bringing up with what Revisto does as a creative process as well. I have been seeing more of a trend with trade subcontractors just want to say, like, I just want to see the issues on my system and I want to be able to follow it. So being able to just simply move over to the object tree, hide everything else but their system, turn on their issues, and then follow their system as far as where all the clashes are on.
And don't mess with the actual overall BIM coordination. They're looking at their view just for their purpose of trying to solve that one.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And it's now more of an engaging process that they say, I can still engage and see the issues and the clashes that Cody's handing off to me. But you know what? Like, let me just go to the 3D model and just follow where Cody's creating those issues in 3D and just be able to click on them and then reference back to the issue tracker if I need to.
Yeah, which I think is another aspect of the issues is the switchback.
Yep.
To the actual authoring tool.
Exactly.
I've got more compliments from the people that have done that, because it was always, all right, I've got my coordination model here, I've got my authoring tool there, and I'm having to look through to make sure I got the right issue and I'm solving the right thing. As with this, it switches back and there it is. They pick the issue, it pops up in their authoring software, and now they're able to start making the changes to that issue.
Exactly.
That's been a huge thing. Do you think with the switchback aspect of it, do you think that that's going to develop even more?
There we have a lot of feedback requests as far as enhancing switchback. And we've gotten some requests as far as, hey, can Revisto just have a issue tracker panel on my authoring software and being able to select each, and it's just generating the sections there. We've gotten with the move tool, if I move something in Revisto, can it move in the authoring tool for me? Game changer completely, but
Game changer.
100%, because then you're just doing, if you're the one guiding the movements and everyone agrees, then you're moving the model for them on their authoring.
And you're talking about something that has never been done.
Exactly.
That's taking something from not trying to reinvent the wheel to actually putting a new wheel on the car.
Exactly.
So that's a whole different world.
There are conversations along a lot of those lines as far as what is the best approach.
Because that would help the design team and the sub, because they're ultimately both going to really require doing that at the switchback.
Mm-hmm. And just agreeing in Revisto, completing the switchback, and your model's there. It's changed based on a conversation, not along the lines of we've left it open-ended and hope that it's going to be moved in the right spot because the modeler has to do so.
And I think that's the other aspect of Revisto is all the different file types you can bring into. So you still have the traditional AutoCAD, and at some point we will walk away from AutoCAD at some point. I even think that that Autodesk might do that in the next 10 years and basically take all their native projects or products and move them into the next gen products of Revit and things like that. But you are still able to bring in all these different file sets, whether it's DWGs, IFCs, Revit files, you name it, from all different sources, which I think is a huge asset to Revisto that a lot of other programs never had. But also on the other aspect of that, you can bring in file types like laser scans, which has always been hard, trying to bring that into a coordination environment. And it's just so powerful to have that information, but of an existing condition or something that's coming in the future for construction. But it was always so heavy. And I wanted to talk about the file types that you bring in and also some of the reality capture. We'll dive into each one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a general sense, as we process scans, we register those scans before we receive it into a model viewer. The prep is the same. Typically, with what I would do is I would register my scan, making sure that it's referencing the model in the correct coordinate. And then I would bring it over to recap and process it and make it an RCP, clean it up if I have to a little bit. And then bring it into Revisto. Revisto will accept RCPs, RCS, LAS information, a lot of the post-registered formats. And I would prefer that as far as just making sure that level of compression and file size being taken through recap is going to be perfectly fine for Revisto to read. It can still read the native formats, but it would be more to export, more time. And making sure that your scans themselves as well, depending on how large those scans are, I would probably break them up into a sequence scan. You can still bring an entire building all together. Revisto will process it just fine. But as far as how we're sequencing that scan out, whether it be by level, whether it be by quadrant of a building, we can then have ability to turn that information on and off if we want to.
Yeah, and I think that is enormously powerful, whether it's laser scan data or drone data. Being able to they both have their workflows and needs in the industry to get what we're trying to get. And just on a few of the projects that I have that I'm working on right now, we are using all of that to the most of its ability to track the progress of the site and how it interacts with the building. Because I think that is a piece of coordination that has always suffered. Exactly. Is that we are not building a building in the model world. We are building it in the physical world on a job site. And we have to be able to take that data, that is enormous amount of data, compress it to a point which we can make real-time decisions and essentially make the decision in a more physical world more than model. And I think that what you guys have done at Revisto is unreal, because I don't think that any software has done that. It's always been clunky. It's always been tough to push in, but I think it's just, took it to a different level.
Exactly. Of that. Cody, do you mind if you pause real quick? I apologize.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead.
So yeah, the other aspect of reality capture that I think you just announced is OpenSpace and that connection with 360 photos. So first, how do you think 360 photos are changing the way that coordination occurs, and how does that integrate with how Revisto is using that software to do coordination?
Good question, and it's very much about just understanding the preferred workflows that each group on a project works well with. OpenSpace is a application that excels in photo taking. The photo taking process is enormous, as easy as you can take photos or be able to track a timeline of your progress in construction and being able to apply field notes too. And the difference here between Revisto and OpenSpace is, while Revisto is the model coordination and collaboration piece, OpenSpace is the field connection and collaboration and application. So being able to have both together integrated with each other is very much of something that Revisto is not going to do. Yeah, we could take photos, we can post them the issues, but they're very limited because you need to reference and be on site for that information. And right now, where things are at, I don't see a lot of VDC engineers on site. I'm seeing the trend happening, but most of them I do see still in office.
Do you think that the field note aspect and the 360 photo will be tied with an issue?
Yes.
In Revisto, that's the goal.
At a way to start, correct. And today there are workflows that can be imported and exported between both applications and where they live with each other, and it would just be similarly just importing a field note into Revisto. And what we eventually would want is what would Revisto look like inside OpenSpace? What would OpenSpace look like inside Revisto, being based on coordinates and where our OpenSpace issues at versus Revisto issues? Very much
that would be cool if that would all integrate together, because then you could have the field aspect with pictures kind of overlaid with the power of the 2D stamps.
Exactly. And so we built business cases with their teams, and we're agreed that being able to eventually get there is what we would like, because at the same time, Revisto, we are bringing more field engineers into Revisto, and then we're also connecting our VDC more into the field. and having more of a live connection between the two.
And that goes to the standpoint of progress monitoring, because that's one of the things that's a really big aspect of what superintendents do. It's not just the procurement of getting this stuff there to the site, but it's also that progress monitoring to make sure that it was put into place, inspections have occurred, and that you don't lose the materials until they're put in the field, and did it actually get put in correct. I think is an aspect that I hope that agreement between you two, you really develop that out, because I think both companies of Revisto and OpenSpace have their part, but if they can integrate together smoothly, it could create a really good dynamic relationship there.
100%. And you're taking with what would be an as-built process, and you're evolutionizing it.
Yes.
Because you're doing with what superintendents are doing already on site. And if they're using OpenSpace, then they're taking a photo of it, of course.
Yes.
But
you can tie that in with not only the procurement, but also the facility management piece at the end to give
exactly. And so all you're doing is you're providing just an integration off of a process that's already existing. That the benefit of that is now it's referencing the model.
Exactly.
And
yeah. The other piece of that, though, too, is that you have a full photo documentation within the coordination.
Exactly.
And I think that's just absolutely game changer for facility management and going forward. Now, another aspect of the industry that's really starting to explode, and we've done actually a lot on one of the projects that I'm working on at UNC, is GIS and subsurface underground utility model. I think with the advent of all that we've talked about on the reality capture, this is the next big push, is trying to understand the underground conditions. And we still have some devices that we're still using, but a lot of new technologies are coming out to do this. And I think that we're doing this really well with the projects that I'm working on. Do you see that ability to bring in GIS information natively into Revisto just from a GIS source could be on the horizon, or some of that information that you see from the testing actually get put into the model as well, for soils, for utility networks, you name it?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, because these are conversations that we're just now starting, and have a series of projects that are out there that those users are requesting GIS information, whether it be into Revisto, or even if it's an application that Revisto can export to as a way to start. Very much of the same as far as how we're going to approach that relationship with those interested parties, like OpenSpace they did with us. So we know that's the problem to address, and it's a great conversation, because I had this conversation earlier this week. Is Revisto is still based on a coordinate system that is siloed, that never had a reference to where real world coordinates are, based on the GIS system that's being used, because there's several of them out there.
Of course. And I also think too, the geolocation aspect of GIS is important. I think we've always struggled with that. And there's a lot of design teams, for instance, with solar panel design, when they're looking at solar studies and how the earth is moving in coordination with the sun, able to look at how shade impacts a building, but also looking at the civil engineering aspect of how do I get water away from the building and bringing it to the building. Mm-hmm. Just curious about where that aspect of bringing that data into it as to where you think that's going.
I would say at a high level, it would be the GIS coordinate systems, and as a way to reference inside Revisto would be a way to start, in order to, one, a lot of that is because a lot of our current horizontal projects that are out there would require, and are requiring at a minimum, just, can I get a GPS coordinate, and can I get my GIS systems, what's underground with what I'm seeing into Revisto. So I can use that as a way to coordinate, where are we moving? What's around us? And as far as how Revisto is processing external data, just as like with what you explained, that is open-ended. I would say it's still very much of a question as far as how do you even reference that inside a model, as far as the real world environment that building will be placed on.
Right.
So
and I think it's just been a huge challenge that I hope that authoring tools would take that information and push that into Revisto. You have that real world connection, just like with the total station and you name it, be able to auto generate the location of where it is on Earth. And then you're starting from that, and then you're supplementing that with drone photos and laser scans and 360 photos. But everything is geolocated so that it's all on the same playing ground of where you're actually physically building the building or the road.
Exactly.
Other integrations. Obviously, Revisto is a collaboration tool, but we still have all the paperwork. So there's the integration with Procore or other BIM softwares like BIM 360 for Autodesk side of things. Where do you see documentation going on that front and the integration with Revisto? And let me add to that, the ability to elevate to an RFI, connecting that to an issue within Procore, and then essentially closing both out versus, looking at other integrations, whether it's with the design team. Let's say they're not using Procore, they might use Informa or something like that. Want to talk about that. And then the second aspect of that, do you see other ways, such as like observations or coordination issues on the front end for constructibility versus an RFI?
So I think we can say we are always in talks with our current integrators out there, the Procores, the Autodesks, and understanding what we can do to enhance that current integration. A lot of the things that we want part of our team, like with Procore, is the ability to better manage how RFIs interact with Procore. And that's a conversation we're having now, as far as, can I have a better control of the status of my RFI from Revisto, and as a way to control that in Procore? Or can I just have two statuses, a Revisto status and a Procore status? The Procore status just reflects the status of that RFI, but I can still maintain and control the issue itself inside Procore as a way to say, even though a RFI is closed, does that mean it's closed in coordination? Not all the time. So being able to have that level of control is what we're going to work on. Being able to integrate with drawings directly, big one. That's something that we hear inside our team, as far as just, we want that to happen as a way just to say it's a one-for-one sync of information. And then being able to tie issues with Procore observations. This is where my team comes in, because that integration does not exist. But creating those workflows of establishing, if we're creating Revisto observations that need to be made into Procore observations, we're then using connections of export. What are those file types that we can export as? I can just take a quick link of the issue that would need to be referenced in the Procore observation, ensure that that issue title is the same as that observation title, based on its sequence of observation inside Procore that's being generated, and to be sure that they both unanimously live with each other in parallel. So making sure that we are referencing information that's coming from Revisto back into Procore. And with what we see things there is, yes, it's definitely going to be an admin task, probably on the BIM teams. But that's identifying those workflows first is where we need to go to improve those integrations thereafter, as far as what else are we seeing happening.
And those revisions that you talked about with the drawings, that's a huge aspect of document control for a job. So being able to take that, and as you get new revisions, automatically pushing back into Revisto that has that the tags on it, that's going to be not only important to BIM coordination, but observations as a whole for constructibility on the front end.
Exactly.
And that's a huge push for us to take constructibility into the next era. And that's what I think is going to do that, is trying to better integrate the document management solution and the coordinations.
Exactly. So what those integrations look like further on, it would be a simple of it would be an example of those project management tools we'll always need from and Revisto is the collaboration and coordination tool. We very much have projects where we live side by side, with Procore, with Autodesk 360, and are able to operate just fine for the my role, the GC's needs, and creating a better source of how Revisto sends information, how well both project management platform and Revisto is interconnected, and being able to send and receive information even more than just in 2Ds. Can Revisto pull down the models that are posted in Procore, and use that as a way of saying, okay, well,
or push back to
exactly.
Procore. Yep.
Exactly. And so then we're giving more options to the process now. In my region, moving the subs to have to export to Revisto, sometimes a different conversation to have. But if we're still just saying, oh, just, drop them up in Procore, drop them in the BIM folder, and Revisto will do the pulling down from there. If we can get there.
Yeah. That'll help a lot.
Yep, exactly.
Switching gears a little bit again, integrations, site logistics, 4D and 5D. On all three of those fronts separately, do you see Revisto in the future being used for logistics and procurement?
They are for logistics. Revisto is already being used at a high level. Site logistics, for example. There are, with what would be almost a hybrid of Bluebeam Studio sessions and making sure that information reaches to the rest of the project team inside Revisto. So you would have projects that would begin early on in the logistics phase and would have Bluebeam sessions first, marking up on how to stage the site, being able to simply enough, we're checking that document out of Revisto, because what we're doing is we're setting up the Revisto project, we're putting the appropriate documentation in there to start, we're inviting those people, and as they receive that project invite, they're just simply accessing the documents that would be as a template they would access on their Z drive, to be able to then just check that out from Revisto, bring it into Bluebeam if they want to begin to use their symbol libraries, with what they've used as templates, and then to be able to import that, check that back in to Revisto for everyone else to see, is a way that we're beginning to see as a way to start. And then from there, all operations team are just then going in, creating markups, stage this differently, let's move the trailers in a different direction. Where's how the sequence of grading is going to happen for your site, and show that at a very 2D high level. That's already a creative process that is engaging those operations teams early on.
Do you want it to be more of or Revisto, should I say? Do you think that it's a more overlays and symbols, or do you think like resource catalogs and trying to do some of that logistics within Revisto? Or does that stay within the authoring tools?
I think right now that is going to stay in the authoring tools. Us connecting to external databases would be very much of just with what we can release out as a model API. I think that's definitely a model API conversation, and not to bump away your comment, but a lot of our solution will be when we release Model API, which right now is slated for next year, maybe end of next year, then a lot of that would be a possibility as far as, can we give that information out to those databases? Can those databases talk with Revisto, and what can we compound off of that? Is, then that's an identified need of our users, and then maybe integration would happen.
Yeah, because there's a couple of softwares out there that you could absolutely link to, and I think that you would stay as the more integrative, collaborative platform, but create the link between the procurement aspect of different things coming and going from the site, whether it's an issue or you name it, or in the model itself, or the other aspect of it, like the resource catalog. You're just pulling that data in as a general coordination collaboration.
Exactly.
As a general integration, which leads to the 4D. So with the scheduling piece, do you see as a means? I know that Revisto probably does not want to be a 4D BIM solution per se, but maybe take the ability, let's say from P6 or Synchro or something like that, bring that data from there into Revisto to look at, scheduling.
I would say from a scheduling aspect, well, to answer your question first, we do very, very basic 4D approach right now, and it's a very model interaction based 4D approach.
Do you think that it would just stay more so like that with a standard link, keep that in the ability of programs like that to handle that aspect of it, and then simply just be able to jump into it to see that part, then come back to the actual model itself?
The way that I exactly would see that, as far as a way of reference, we're following, for example, we're supporting a few customers out there that do process pipe tracking, for heavy industrial projects, and their teams are being able to track I would say, as far as like with what I remember, we're tracking 30 plus statuses on a piece of pipe. And with that, right now that's possible in Revisto. It's very manual, but as a way to track, as far as saying, if we have a PE that's doing this on site with their iPad, we can create the environment, create the custom statuses on each piece of pipe, and be able to interact with that status as a way to show visually on the model with where that status is reflecting, and giving everyone else a way of just, let's move my appearance template. Here's my status tracking view, and here's the entire model of its status. And if there's an issue and a discrepancy, then we're taking that and moving that into an issue.
Yeah, because on the logistics front, because they're both very interconnected, the 3D logistics and 4D as a whole, because that's the general way of how the project is going to be built. Objects and programs like CM Builder and Structs Hub that do that well, tying that in with Revisto as like a link, and then something like Synchro tied with P6 that would then integrate together very, very well, I think.
Exactly.
But keep what each of the companies do well and their focuses, but get a larger scale idea of how that integrates with the actual coordination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would say, and I'm not sure if I'm speaking ahead of the company's intentions, but I have a very good pulse as far as what's the practical approach for Revisto. That's sort of the conversation that we always start with, is what's within our means, because with what we're already achieving up to a point, can we compound on that and achieve a version of 4D that's possible?
Yes.
And of what I just explained to you as far as that model tracking goes, and to provide a status, now it's just to basically like, what's our simple approach? Well, we have a lot of users that are just using Excel as a way to track.
Mm-hmm. And
Revisto just attaches a way to Excel sheets as far as those are connected to the model elements, and then there's a way to change them in a drop down in Excel, and then just to export that information. Revisto updates the model, and then being able to have a two-way connection between what a simple database would be there. And
That
back
reporting aspect becomes a lot better in that regard.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then from there, then it would be a connection to a data point, a database, as far as if it's P6. Can P6 then communicate that as a way of connecting to the model elements and being able to have that way of communication? And what I'm trying to get there is each tool that's out there that has a special, that is specialized in 4D is deployed on a project with a specific budget. Synchro, I don't see Synchro until a project is past 100 million.
Right. Yeah.
Because
it gets too big for different programs. You have to get to a certain level just because of the cost that's associated.
Exactly. And so
I completely agree.
If we're using Revisto and we have that information already, then maybe it's a version of 4D that's accessible.
Right, or just a simple link that ties that together versus trying to solve the 4D conundrum that is out there.
And so with what that'll do is then that provides better exposure of 4D to your mid-size, to your smaller GCs that want to get into it, but would very much, require that premier project for that to happen.
Exactly.
So I would say then we're just with that approach, we're going to be, an option as far as with what's right for the project.
Right. Which is another aspect of prefabrication and 5D. So then, you got the front end of 5D, which you're looking at how the model is used for cost, the back check cost. And then on the back side of it, during construction, you're using the model to help prefabricate and to hone in and make sure that those costs were estimated correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume the same way with what we just talked about with logistics and 4D, not diving into the world of, trying to estimate projects, but mainly probably linking to that data to be able to say, okay, here's a data point that you should know that this, information that is in here costs this amount. And here's the data that's coming from programs like Assemble that we estimated. And from the prefabrication, here's where it is. It's being milled and now it's on its way. And I think that's what we're trying to get to in the industry. Not one product is going to solve it. It just has to be able to integrate. That interoperability between all these different things, because that's the planning aspect of the industry, right? That is one of the most important parts of what this industry is about, is planning. Because once it gets out into the field, it is game on. And it's turning a more mental planning aspect into a physical aspect and of work. And that's what we are as an industry trying to solve, is trying to take some of that rework that just absolutely pains people. I don't know, and you've seen it. There is nothing more demoralizing. I could say this in every single podcast. There is nothing more demoralizing than seeing somebody that's put their physical time and effort into building something and then having them tear it down. Nothing is more demoralizing. Because it's physically, there's heart in that. Yeah. There's a lot of that goes into that quality of labor and how they've put that in place, and they want to build it right. That's it. That's what it comes down to. And what does it take on the front end to do that? That's what we every single day in this industry need to try to solve, is trying to make sure that the industry doesn't waste like it has, because it has, and we plan better into the future.
Exactly.
And I just think that that's what you guys are doing. One aspect that I think is interesting about all of this is going back a little bit to reality capture, and that's into construction cameras. So we've talked a lot about static type devices. What about dynamic devices like construction cameras? Back in the day, it used to be just a time-lapse camera. Mm-hmm. What if that can be integrated within what Revisto does? Not per se take on the aspect of construction cameras, because that's a whole nother field, but the added ability to connect in. Where do you see the power of a construction camera that's dynamic over something that's more static, like pictures.
I would say then Revisto has achieved the field connection.
Right.
That is still the open-ended question as far as how interconnected are we going to be on site. And right now we're very much taking on the human factor, who's taking Revisto out to the site with them rather than Revisto already being there to begin with.
Right.
So you're very correct in this, and you're moving into a discussion that is very they are discussions that are very much brainstorming conversations on our end. I could tell you, like my team, the customer success team, we're trying to understand like where the practical use is at. And I would say we're into an evolution of Revisto that may look completely different by the time we're at where Revisto can provide, where's that feed coming in from? Where can we access that information? How does that look in Revisto? And to be able to have that live camera connection back to the site. And are those cameras smart cameras, right?
Right.
Can we
They
be
have
able to
tons of data. They have tons of ways of bringing that data into something that's not just a time lapse of the project, but an actual live review of trucks coming and going, and looking at how the progress is developing every second versus a static second.
Exactly. You're moving into a realm as far as what cameras are doing to track site activity, but at the same time you're also moving into if equipment, if our project teams out there are using RFID tags, even can you even view where that live activity is at in positioning inside Revisto as well.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going with it. Mm-hmm. And then on the back end of it, like you said, in RFID, all of this stuff is in a lot of ways has been prefabricated. And when you have that capability already within it to review fabrication from the sub and the vendors, and then you could see how that could then be turned into something like cameras that could dynamically see it coming into place and making sure it's being put in place right. Then finally, the facility management piece, which is turning that over to the client. And now you've completed the full thing. You've completed constructibility all the way from that napkin that was thought about all the way from the beginning, all the way to the end, through and through with the integrations that we talked about. But in the end, planned well and then execute. And that's my question to you. I feel like that's the next step, is that interoperability between them.
So the facility management piece, I think, is like you said, it's the execution of the entire process. But also is also a point that, in my personal belief, there's a split as far as where we see the success of BIM at. My belief is the success of BIM is how the owner can use the data of their building to manage it, and to understand the life cycle of with what we have been doing as BDC personnel, to be able to share with them that this is a plug and play application, whether if it turns into what Revisto may end up evolving into, or a different application for a facility management tool. It is now the submission of data that is not only to the owner, but to the city and the municipalities that data is also available to as well. Ultimately moving over into what would end up being smart and intelligent cities. So,
and you think, in conclusion to the conversation that we're having, you believe that that's the next aspect of it, is taking all that interoperability, connecting all, giving that over to an owner that then could give it over to a city to create a smart city to develop out the infrastructure of all of it versus just one building.
Exactly, correct. That is my view of the BIM process being maximized. That is where I believe the most impact can be provided with what we do day in and day out. And the maximization, the divergence that I explained earlier but what's the maximization of BIM for general contractors is the maximization of automation and how it optimizes processes for construction. What is BIM doing as far as technology and optimizing the way we're installing on site?
And putting the person in position of power to be able to make decisions and take them away from the tediousness of certain things.
Exactly.
And put them in the driver's seat of what they're there to do.
Exactly. And that in itself protects the GC. It's a quality assurance that why we're hired for our employers that are out there to show them exactly, with where our value is at. And I think that is a really great way to ensure that, you have a building that is to be constructed accordingly without surprises. If it's done right. Is it done right today? We're getting there. But that the I guess, speaking more to myself, the passion that I have within the BIM process is how that data lives and where it ends up going out of the hands of the GC, and it being us being contributors of what we would eventually begin seeing erecting around us in the future would have a digital footprint or a digital twin on how you want to use the term today, would be exactly as far as us being able to have maybe even urban planning in the future be more optimized, be more efficient, because we had a VDC team touch that building and the data is there as far as a way to say, like, we're using that information that was given to us in a live way to be able to say, we have a selection of buildings that are already meeting their 25, 50-year span. We're getting alerts on the application that we have because the data is already there. What is the carbon footprint of those buildings? What are they generating on our end? We're becoming very green-minded right now as a whole, the entire planet. If we eliminated those buildings because they are at their lifespan, and would say, what if we were to move into green space instead? What does that would look like for the building, and interconnected with other systems as far as human traffic, the ability to understand with what human life and happiness work with just the way smart cities are planning things as well. Those are big things as far as that can't happen because right now they're just based off of a gut assumption or thinking that, with where we need to hear things on people's beliefs as far as where a city should go, rather than understanding that we now have the data to support it.
Right. And make smarter decisions about planning and whether it's for public projects or private projects, and understand how the city should smartly grow, versus, you get into an aspect of it years later and you're maybe we didn't plan this as well as we thought it was.
Exactly.
Because that's the other piece of it. It's not, we focus on one project because that's what we're building, but you're not just building one project. You're building a community, you're building a nation, you're building a world. And how we interact, all of us, the whole population of the world, there is no other industry in the world, and I always state this every time as well, that has more impact on the world than we do. And it's because every single day that somebody wakes up, goes to work, goes to school, drives down the road, we're there. We're impacting that. You see us with orange vest on every single day, but there's thousands of people that are out there that do every type of job imaginable to this industry. And in conclusion to this podcast episode with you, I think that Revisto is one of those companies that's doing that, make that a little bit better, and make the industry a lot better to work on different things and to coordinate different things, but more so making it better to plan and into the future. David, I wanted to thank you for joining us. I know it's good, long podcast episode, but and taking the time on the weekend to do so. And, any final thoughts you have?
I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure as far as engaging. I've loved conversations on where we explored today. But final thoughts is as far as the impression that we've given you of Revisto is very much an impression we want to still nurture, and to be able to make sure that we're listening to you, we're listening to our users as far as where this process should go. Know that Revisto is not only going to be just based on with where we hear feedback from, we also have a vision, and we also would like to carry the process in the way Revisto can, and be able to still, my team, myself, we've been there, and we know what it feels like as far as working with a process or a tool that was never meant for a different area of BIM or VDC, or you're maximizing them out is the way we could. We are here for the support. We listen to you because we've had radio silence on our end for support as well. And we continue to strive for that as far as we evolve as an application. We plan to still take those people with us, take you with us, as far as not only just making sure that you use the application and you're learning at the same time, but also taking the process to a better place is where our team finds fulfillment. Where Revisto finds fulfillment is being able to be that impact on the industry in the ways we can.
But thank you for those final thoughts, and thank you for joining us.